Hi, I'm Vasish Dudu. I'm a PhD student in Secure Systems Group at the University of Waterloo. Today I'll be talking about our systematization on unintended interactions among machine learning defenses and risks. This is a joint work with Sebastian Schiller and our advisor, Professor N. Ashoka. Machine learning models are susceptible to a wide range of risks to security, privacy, and fairness. Prior works have proposed defenses to mitigate against each of these risks. However, the effectiveness of these defenses is only evaluated with respect to the risks that they protect against. But in practice, machine learning models have to be deployed while incorporating multiple defenses simultaneously. This raises two questions. One, can two defenses interact negatively with each other? And the second is when a defense against a specific risk is effective, can it increase or decrease the susceptibility to some other unrelated risk? These are what we refer to as unintended interactions. So to answer the first question, we have unintended interactions among defenses, where prior work, including ours, have shown that combining multiple defenses together may result in conflicts. The second is unintended interactions between a defense and other unrelated risks. And here we find that there is limited evaluation because prior work considered only specific risks, defenses, interactions, or do not consider the underlying causes. So there is no systematic framework to explore unintended interactions. And this is the focus of our paper. So we present a systematic framework to understand unintended interactions, and we conjecture that overfitting and memorization are the underlying causes, and and factors which influence them are likely to influence these interactions as well. Um, then we survey existing literature on unintended interactions and situate them within our framework. And finally, we present a guideline to conjecture about previously unexplored interactions, and we consider and empirically validate the conjecture from the guideline for two previously unexplored interactions. So I want to give a background of different machine learning risks and differences considered in our work. So we considered the risks to security, which includes evasion, poisoning, and unauthorized model ownership, several risks to privacy, and discriminatory behavior as a risk to fairness. And on the left, we have corresponding defenses which protect against each of the risks. To systematically explore unintended interactions, we consider all pairwise combination between a defense and unrelated risks. So, for instance, considering adversarial training, which protects against the risk of evasion, we want to see what the interaction with all the remaining risks are other than evasion. So we previously mentioned that overfitting and memorization are the underlying causes, and there are two reasons for this. One, um, effective defenses may induce, reduce, or rely on overfitting and memorization, and all the risks tend to exploit overfitting and memorization. Overfitting and memorization are distinct and can occur simultaneously. So overfitting is measured as the difference between the accuracy on train and test data sets. And this is an aggregate metric as it accounts for all data records in both the data sets. Memorization, on the other hand, is a score that is assigned to individual data records in the training data set. It is measured as the difference in the model's predictions on a data record with and without that data record in the training data set. So to illustrate the relationship between overfitting and memorization, we consider a simple experiment. We take a synthetic data set with two classes, orange class and blue class, and here the training data records are indicated in circle, while the crosses indicate test data records. The base case is where there is no overfitting and memorization because the training data records are linearly separable, and the test data distribution is similar to the training data distribution. So when we train a multi-layer perceptron, it learns a linear decision boundary to distinguish between both these classes. We take this base example and add noise to the testing data records of both the classes such that they fall on the wrong side of the decision boundary, as seen here. And this results in a decrease in test accuracy. And we have a case where there is overfitting but no memorization. Now, instead of adding noise to the test data records, we take the base example and add noise to the train data records now. This results in the training data records being closer together, and now they're no longer linearly separable, and hence the neural network cannot learn a simple linear classifier, but it learns this complex decision boundary to fit each of the training data records for both the classes perfectly. Here, memorization is non-zero, but there is no overfitting. Finally, we have a case where we add noise to both the training and testing data records for both classes, and this is where we observe overfitting and memorization to occur simultaneously. Now, given the complexity of the data sets and the capacity of the model in current uh, machine learning paradigm, this is the setting that is most likely to occur in practice, and this is what we assume for the rest of the paper. That is, overfitting and memorization occur simultaneously. Now, I want to describe our framework, which is used to evaluate unintended interactions. Now, a framework consists of different factors which influence overfitting and memorization. And this allows us to have a fine-grained understanding of what influences these unintended interactions. So we start by factors which influence overfitting. Bias and variance are two underlying reasons why overfitting occur, where bias is the error from poor hyperparameter choices for the machine learning model. So as an example, if you consider a very small model, which indicates a high bias, it prevents learning relations between attributes and labels well. Variance, on the other hand, is the error from sensitivity to changes in the training data set. And high variance is when the model fits the noise in the training data set. Now, there's a trade-off between bias and variance, which will result in overfitting. And this trade-off can be balanced using two factors. One is the size of the training data and the model capacity. We categorize the factors influencing memorization depending on whether they're related to the dataset, objective function, or the model. So for dataset related factors, we have tail length of the distribution, where data records constituting the tail of the distribution are likely to be more memorized. We also note that number of attributes and whether the model focuses on learning stable attributes which do not change with change in distribution of the data also correlates with memorization. Um, we also have objective function related factors, which includes curvature, smoothness, and distinguishability in model observables across dataset subgroups and models themselves, where these model observables are basically predictions or intermediate activations. And finally, the distance of training data records to the decision boundary also uh, influences memorization. Finally, we have model capacity, which is a factor that influences both overfitting and memorization. Given this framework with all these different factors, we now situate prior work, and we indicate whether the prior work shows an increase in the risk for a specific combination of defense and risk, or whether it's a decrease in the risk or a particular combination has not been explored. We also indicate whether prior work evaluates the influence of factors empirically, theoretically, or simply conjecture about a factor. Now, we revisit different risks and defenses that we showed in the background. For each defense D, we indicate whether the effectiveness of the defense correlates with a change in a particular factor. And we also show whether a change in a factor correlates with a change in susceptibility to a risk R. We use the upward arrow for positive correlation and a downward arrow for negative correlation. And our table basically enumerates all the defenses and risks and the factors and how they correlate with those factors. Now, using this, we want to present a guideline by which researchers and practitioners can conjecture about unintended interactions. So for a defense D, a risk R, and a common factor F, we use a pair of arrows that describe how D and R correspond to F. For a given common factor, if both the arrows align, then it indicates that the risk increases when a defense is effective, and that's depicted by a red circle. And otherwise, if the arrows are not aligned, then it's a green circle. Now, there could be multiple factors which are common for a combination of defense and a risk. And if all the factors suggest the same thing, then the conjectured overall interaction is what those factors indicate. Otherwise, we have to prioritize the conjecture from dominant factor, and this notion of dominance of factors depends on the attack, and we'll come to this in the next slide. Finally, there could be non-common factors which may affect the overall interaction as well. So for dominant factors, we note that we can categorize the factors as active or passive depending on whether the factors are directly exploited by the attacks, which is the case for O1, O2, and O3. And passive factors like data or model configuration are the rest. So attacks generally exploit active factors, and we deem them as dominant because any change in those factors will result in a significant change in the susceptibility to a particular risk. So there were two cases in our framework where we had to use this notion of dominant factors. So differential privacy increases the susceptibility to evasion, as shown in prior work. And our conjecture and using our guideline, we found three factors in common. And by identifying the dominant factors, which was O1 and O3, we could decide that the interaction is given by a red, which also matches the empirical results. Second, we had group fairness, which increases the susceptibility to membership inference. And the work that empirically showed this also points out that the distance to the decision boundary plays a role in the susceptibility to the risk. And using a guideline and identifying the dominant factor, we Now, using this guideline, we conjecture about two unexplored interactions and empirically validate them. The first is group fairness and data reconstruction, and the common factor between both of them is distinguishability across subgroups, which suggests green. And there is one non-common factor, which is the number of attributes that may affect the susceptibility of the risk. So what we do is we perform the attack when the model is trained without fairness and with fairness, and we find that using a fair model, the attack success is lower, which confirms our conjecture. On evaluating the non-common factor, we find that for less number of attributes, the conjecture holds, but as we increase the number of attributes, the memorization of individual attributes decreases, and hence this success of the attack is not the same anymore, and there is no change in attack success on using fair model. Now, the second interaction is explanations and distribution inference, and here the common factor suggests that there's a negative interaction between them, and there are two non-common factors, which is the number of attributes and model capacity, which may affect the susceptibility to different distribution inference. Now, for validating this empirically, we train a bunch of models on a training data set with a distribution alpha 1, which is the ratio of males to females, and another set of models are trained on a data set with distribution alpha 2. And then the goal of the attack is to use the model explanations from both set of models to predict whether the model was trained on a data set with alpha 1 or alpha 2. And here we find that across different explanation algorithms, there is an increased susceptibility to inference as indicated by an attack accuracy of greater than 50% for most ratios. Now we evaluate to see how the non-common factors influence the interaction, starting with the number of attributes. On increasing the number of attributes, we find that the susceptibility to distribution inference decreases, and we attribute this to lower memorization of the relevant attributes which are responsible for which are required for distribution inference. The second is model capacity, and we find that increasing the model capacity results in a higher attack success due to increased memorization. These examples show that our guideline can be used to conjecture about unexplored interactions, and also we validate our guidelines predictions with interactions that have already been considered in prior work. However, there are some exceptions to our guideline. First, the differences in adversary model can change the interaction type, and we find three such cases in our survey where difference in adversary assumptions can result in different interaction type, but our guideline can only predict one of them because it does not account for the adversary model. The second is that there are some risks and defenses which have too few factors evaluated in prior work, and as a result, all the interactions corresponding to these defenses and risks are hard to predict using our guideline. So as part of our current work, we are developing a software framework for systematic empirical evaluation of unexplored interactions. This acts as a tool for practitioners and researchers to evaluate the models and assess the risk of using a defense on a particular model. There's also a need to understand how different variants of defenses and risk impact the interactions. So, to summarize, unintended interactions are an important concern in practice, and by looking at the common factors between a defense and a risk, we can conjecture about the nature of such interactions. And as part of future work, we want to look at how to design defenses which can minimize such unintended increases in other risks. Thank you.